out of the 3 boats I've got, the only one I'm never going to have any problems with corrosion is this bare tinny, and I'll explain why. Now, the 2 ways you get corrosion in your boat is from your batteries or from shore power, which small boat captains don't have to worry about shore power too much, but your batteries can get a current leak in them, and that'll run through your boat and cause some sort of corrosion, some electrolysis type of corrosion. But the main type of corrosion you'll get is from 2 different metals causing galvalitic corrosion. And you've probably never heard of galvalitic corrosion, but it's the main reason why you get corrosion in your boat. Now, I won't get any of that in that little tinny because it doesn't have batteries in it and it's got no other metal in it. So let's talk about my other boat, my 4 metre bluefin and my 4.5 metre CJ. So when it comes to a battery isolator switch, do you need to turn it off? Look, you really do. There's a couple of issues with battery isolator switches. The first is you may have a little draw somewhere, you may have left something on, or you may have an accidental draw just the way your boat's wired. So by turning that isolating switch off, you're going to save your boat's battery. But more importantly, the electrolysis that is caused from the battery running through to the engine in particular and other electronics can really cause a lot of corrosion issues in your boat. Now, you can get a electronic leak somewhere, if you like, for want of a better term, but what that is when some wiring is in contact with the boat, it'll start to earth itself off on the boat, and that'll create a lot of corrosion, a lot of electrolysis. And electrolysis is really important with engine shafts and stuff as well. So turn that isolating switch off and you'll save yourself a lot of issues with electrolysis later on. Now, galvalitic corrosion is when you have 2 different metals in contact with each other that causes some sort of electrolysis that can start to cause corrosion and can even put holes in your boats. Now, galvanic corrosion is the reason why a lot of boats have sacrificial anodes in them. Now, the sacrificial anode, sometimes they're aluminium, but it's not going to work in a boat because most of my boats are aluminium, so they'll be zinc or something like that. It'll be a material that will corrode quicker than the rest of the material around it. So, as the name suggests, it's the sacrificial anode that's going to get all the corrosion rather than the aluminium. For those out there who are a bit like me and want to know the science behind it, all metals are made up of different type of atoms, and different atoms have different protons, different neutrons, different electrons, and all that sort of stuff. So I've got 2 different types of metals here in a salt water solution, and the salt water is important because it's going to balance out and allow me to measure the charge between the 2 different metals. And I've got one that's brass and another one that's stainless steel. So I'm going to turn my little digital voltage or multimeter on, and just going to connect my probes to the 2 metals, and it's bouncing around all over the place, but it levels out at about 0.4 of a millivolt difference between those 2 metals. So without getting into the science in too much detail, some metals hold on to their electrons really tightly and other metals release them really quite easily. So metals like aluminium, magnesium and zinc and stuff like that will release its electrons really quickly. That's why we make anodes out of this. They'll release their electrons to other metals, and that's why they'll corrode really quite quickly. That's exactly how a battery works. The negative terminal is called your anode, and that'll release ions, and the positive terminal, which is your cathode, will want to receive them. Now, if you put a wire between these 2, because the anode and the cathode are separated, then the ions that are released by the anode will be able to travel through the wire and go through the cathode, which creates an electrical current through that wire, which is why batteries work, which is why I call it electrolysis, even though I'll say it again, it's not completely accurate, in the metals in the boat. One metal will want to release some ions and the other metal will want to receive it. It causes a little tiny current, and that's where you get all this damage to, boats like this. So the importance of turning off your battery isolator switch, having some sort of gap between your 2 different metals to reduce all sorts of corrosion in your boat, whether it's from an electrical leak from your batteries, or whether it's from 2 different metals, or whether it's from leaving your batteries turned on. Even having batteries in boats is not a great idea. If you're storing your boat on a dock or anything for a long period of time, you've got it plugged into shore power, you are going to have problems. It's just how it is. So small boat captains don't have to worry about that too much. But if you're storing your boat for a long period of time, think about taking your batteries out. Now in my little tinny here, while I don't have a battery isolation switch, I do have a big 110 amp hour battery here that I do have a circuit breaker on. With that circuit breaker, I can just hit this button on the top of the breaker, isolate that battery and reduce the amount of voltage leakage I'm going to get from this big battery. Now if we look over on my old boat, which is, now this boat's nearly 20 years old, and it's had a lot of different materials and stuff bolted to it, so different stainless steel screws and everything, and you can see all the corrosion build up where that material has been. There's a battery up the front that runs the electric motor, and then there's a battery at the back that runs all the accessories. So there's two batteries. There's also a bus bar on there, and that's connected to the hull. So there's a slight electrolysis running through that boat as well, and that's why all the edges are starting to bubble up over like a long period of time, and I'm talking nearly 20 years. And when you're fitting new things to your boat, like sounders and stuff like that, you'll see here my sounders have got little nylon washers lifting them up so that the steel of the sounder bracket isn't in contact with the aluminium. Now when you put your screws in, you can also get something called a corrosion eliminator, or I don't know if it eliminates it completely, but something like this. This is called Tef Gel. There's a few different brands on the market. They're all about as good as each other. But put this on your nuts as you're screwing them in, and that'll give a bit of a protective coat to help minimize, not so much eliminate, but minimize any electrolysis you'll get or galvanitic corrosion you'll get from different materials reacting with your boat. So you don't need to know all the science behind it, but you need to understand that you need to turn your battery switch off, you need to reduce any current leakage you may have in your boat, and you need to reduce contact between two different metals, and you'll save your boat.